Hey folks, this is Vince with Dad's Gaming Addiction, and today we're going to take a very quick look at the game Star Wars the Card Game. Now this game is for 2 players, ages 10 and up, and the average play time is between 30 and 60 minutes. In this game, one player is going to be taking on the role of the light side, while the other one takes on the role of the dark side, and they're going to be racing to complete objectives before the other person does. Let's just take a quick moment to look at the components and see how the game is played. Now, as far as the components are concerned, this is just a small sample. There's actually more components than this. For example, there are a total of 240 cards in the box, and this is obviously just a small sample of that. Each side has 120 cards, and it's made up of multiple decks, and I'll get into that in a minute. But over here on the right, you have some various tokens. For example, these shield tokens. They are placed on cards as needed to indicate that they have shields on that particular character or unit. You have these focus tokens, and basically these are played on cards as they perform actions. This helps players keep track of which cards are considered exhausted and which cards are considered ready. And you've got these damage counters here. As players do damage to cards and objectives, these tokens will help players track the total damage on a particular card. Now you've also got this balance of the force token, and as you see there's a dark side and a light side. And depending on whose turn it is, and depending on which side is flipped over, a particular player will receive a bonus. You've also got this Death Star tracker, and this basically represents the player's dark side's progress throughout the game. And this also serves as a timer of sorts. As the game goes on, this tracker will go up. And if the dark side player manages to reach this 12, then they win the game. So that's one of the ways that the dark side can win the game. And I'll explain how this all works in a minute. Now, before I said that each player had 120 cards in their total stack, and I know that sounds like a lot to keep track of, but it's really not. That particular stack is broken up into multiple decks of 6 cards each. So if you do the math on that, you've got about, I want to say, 18 or 19 decks per side. And you're not going to be using all of them in a particular game. Now, how do you determine which cards or which decks that you use for a particular game? Well, that's where these affiliation cards come in, and each side has 3. On the Imperial side, or on the dark side, you've got the Imperial Navy faction, you have the Sith faction, and you have the Scum and Villainy faction. And depending on which affiliation you choose, you'll be choosing particular decks to use from your overall stack. The same thing with the with the light side of the Force. You have the Rebel Alliance, you have the Smugglers and Spies, and you have the Jedi factions. And again, depending on which faction you pick, you'll be seeding your deck for that particular game with certain cards from your overall stack. Now lastly, I just want to quickly touch on these two. Each side has 3 of these Force cards, and players will be able to assign certain characters on the table to their side of the Force. And I don't want to get too much into that right now, but to suffice it to say that that has a direct impact on whether or not the balance of the Force will be on the light side or the dark side. Now, just to briefly expand on what I was saying earlier about there being multiple decks of 6 cards each in a stack, you've got one objective card, and these are the cards that players are going to be trying to destroy throughout the game. And each objective card is accompanied by 5 cards of varying types. Some have characters like Darth Vader, Darkside Apprentice, Vader's lightsaber. These serve to buff characters in some way. You've got interrupts and events like Force Choke, different things like that, Heat of Battle. And basically, these are one entity. So if you were to customize your starting deck in some way, you have to keep these cards together. You cannot take Darth Vader out of this deck and then place it into your deck for the game. You have to keep all of the particular decks together the one objective card and the 5 accompanying cards. You have to keep all of them together and switch them out as complete entities. Otherwise, you'll break the game. Now, with that in mind, when a player is done picking their affiliation and done picking the decks that are required for that affiliation, they'll go ahead and separate their objective cards and their what are called command cards into 2 separate decks. Now, a player is going to need at the minimum 10 decks of 6 cards each in order to play the game. So since there's 1 objective card in a 6-card deck and there are 5 accompanying cards in a 6-card deck, you're going to have 10 objective cards total and 50 of these cards, command cards of varying types. What will end up happening at this point, the objectives, the 10 objective cards will be placed over here, and the remaining cards will be your draw deck, your command draw deck, and be placed over here. And finally, you have some other things going on over here. You've got your trackers and tokens. You've got the balance of the force token, which starts on the light side for the beginning of the game. And your Death Star tracker will start on the 0. Now, before players actually get started, what they're going to do is they're going to draw 4 of these objective cards from their objective deck, take a look at them, and decide to keep 3. Let's just say that this player decides to keep these 3. And they'll place them right underneath their objective draw deck, put the other one on the bottom of the deck, and that's that. Now, as far as objective cards are concerned, you've got a number of things going on here. For example, you've got this little gray number, or this gray box with a white number on it. This is the number of resources that a player can make use of to buy cards from their hand and put it onto the battlefield. So this is sort of like a resource card on top of an objective card. Down here in the lower left, you have a health number. This is basically how many hits that this objective can take before it gets destroyed. And again, that's the goal of both players. The light side is going to be trying to destroy the dark side objectives, while the dark side is going to be trying to destroy the light side objectives. Now, on occasion, these cards will have special abilities listed on them. For example, in this particular one, you limit 1 per objective deck, and the reaction is after you win an edge battle, as the attacker, deal 1 damage to the engaged objective. I know that doesn't mean much to you right now, but just keep in mind that certain objectives have special abilities. Now, as far as the starting hand is concerned, each player will draw up to a certain number. And you can see what is called the starting reserve number on their affiliation card along the bottom. In this case, the Rebel Alliance is allotted 6 cards as a default hand size. So, in this case, the player would draw 6 cards to start their or to form their starting hand. Now, a player's turn is broken up into 6 different phases, and I'll be honest, I'm not going to cover everything here. I'm just going to give you a general overview. The conflict phase alone, with what cards can attack and which are exhausted and how the edge battles work, that can get a little involved, but because of that, I'm just going to go ahead and briefly touch on the turns as a whole. The first phase is called the balance phase. And all players will do is take a look at the balance of the force token and see what side it's on. And this will have varying effects depending on whose turn it is. If it is the light side's turn and this is showing, then the light side can place 1 damage track or 1 damage token on an enemy objective card, which is what they're trying to do. If this is showing and it's the light side's turn, nothing happens. Now, if it's the dark side's turn, 2 things happen. First, the Death Star tracker will move up one space here, and something else may happen depending on what side is showing. If the light side is showing, nothing happens. If the dark side is showing, then the dark side gets to move their tracker up an additional slot. Now, the second phase of a player's turn is called the refresh phase, and that does a few things. For example, if there's less than 3 objective cards showing on that player's side, they get to draw a new objective from the deck so that they have 3. Also, these focus tokens. A player is allowed to remove one focus token from each card that they have. So in this case, this card has two. This player could remove one. This one gets removed. This one gets removed. And this one gets removed. And again, focus tokens are there to keep track of which cards are considered exhausted and which cards are considered ready. A card that is exhausted can't be used for its function. For example, this one is considered exhausted and wouldn't be able to be used for any sort of resource production. If a unit has one of these focus tokens on it, it won't be able to defend or attack during that turn. So again, these track when a card can be used and when it can't be used. The third part of a player's turn is called the draw phase. And like I mentioned earlier, there is a default hand size. The player can take a look at his cards. He has the option, or he or she has the option to discard one of these cards into their discard pile and draw up to their hand size. The fourth part of a player's turn is called the deployment phase. This is where they can take a look at the cards in their hand, spend resources via their affiliation and objective cards. The objective card does, or the affiliation card does have a resource number on it, so players can use that to buy cards. And they'll go ahead and put cards from their hand onto the table so that they can attack and do other things. Again, the resource cost for a card is located in the upper left-hand corner. So in order for me to put this card onto the table, this is Heroic Sacrifice. Sacrifice a vehicle unit to destroy a target enemy vehicle unit with a printed cost 4 or lower. Or I could play this Fleet Command Center, which gives me the ability to generate more resources, but that costs 3. In order to do that, I need to put focus tokens on, that's a funny word, focus tokens. I need to put focus tokens on these cards to indicate that they're being used. Now, I can only put as many focus tokens on an objective or affiliation card as the number listed. In this case, I can only put one focus token on this. Had this said 2, I could put 2 on here and do that if I wanted. But in this case, let's say I wanted to put this Fleet Command down. I would need to spend 1, 2, 3. Because the card does cost 3. And yeah, that's just a quick example of playing a card and spending resources to do that. Now, you won't be able to make use of these resources now until a future turn because these cards are now considered exhausted. Now, the fifth part of a player's turn is called the conflict phase. And like I said earlier, there's a lot to this. So I'm not going to get too deep into this. But for the most part, the units that are considered ready on the battlefield, or the ones that don't have any focus tokens on them, can attack enemy objective cards with the with the intent to destroy them. Before that happens, though, there's something called an edge battle, and all that involves is players playing these the cards in their hand face down, and after they pass consecutively, they'll compare the number of little white dots that are underneath the card cost, and whoever has more is said to have won that edge battle. And there's also some cards in your deck as a whole that have fate listed in the upper right hand corner. These cards are edge battle specific. You can only play these during an edge battle, but they do some special things, like this target of opportunity edge card. If you are the attacking player, deal 1 damage to the engaged objective. So these are sort of like bonus cards to use during an edge battle to do special things. But whoever wins the edge battle can make use of a unit's edge attack if they happen to have any. On a particular character card, you'll see there's icons listed below the picture. The black icon is what the unit can attack with by default, and the white icon represents the edge attack, meaning that if if this player won the edge battle, he can also attack with this icon. So let's say that the Rebel Alliance did in fact win the edge battle. He'd be able to make use of this attack twice rather than only once. this particular icon allows the player to attack an enemy objective. So if the player were to use this card, he would score 2 points against the enemy objective. If he had not won the edge battle, however, he'd only be able to score 1 point against the enemy objective. Some cards don't have edge icons on them. In this case, Home 1 has 2 blasters and 2 of these stars. In this case, the Home 1 would perform 2 units of damage against an enemy objective. And these blasters are the damage that can be inflicted against other units across the way that may be defending. So you can actually destroy other cards on the battlefield with these blaster icons. And again, I don't want to get too much into this, but just to sum this up, players will be utilizing the conflict phase with the intent on destroying enemy objectives. Finally, the 6th phase of a player's turn is called the Force phase, and each player has 3 of these Force cards that they can assign to particular units on the battlefield. And all this does is that tells everyone that they've assigned that particular unit to the Force. Units that are assigned to the Force require an extra focus token to be used, so their abilities will be somewhat limited on the battlefield. However, once a player's turn is over, they'll count up the number of dots that are assigned to the Force. For example, let's say Home 1 was assigned to the Force. You'd count up the number of dots here, and however many other ones were assigned to the Force. And then compare that with their opponent's dots. And whoever had more would then flip the balance of the Force token over to their side. And as mentioned during the first phase, the balance phase, this does play an important role and does give players particular bonuses depending on whose turn it is and depending on which side is flipped over. So having some force points or some force cards on the table might actually benefit you during phase 1. Now that sums up a player's turn as a whole. Again, I didn't cover everything, and it's important to note that there are a few other mechanics that I didn't even touch on. But those are the highlights. This will go back and forth between the players until one of 2 things happen. If this Death Star dial reaches 12, game over for the light side. If the light side player manages to destroy a total of 3 dark side objectives, the light side wins. Now, you're probably wondering then, why does the light side even have objectives if the goal is to get this Death Star tracker up? Well, for every time the dark side destroys a light side objective, they'll take a look at how many objective cards they've destroyed up to that point. And for every card that they've destroyed, they get to add 1 more point to the tracker. So let's say that the dark side destroyed a card in the past and just destroyed a second card. He would take a look at the number of cards in that discard pile, so to speak, or in the score pile, and add that many points to their tracker. So it actually might behoove the dark side to pay attention to these objectives and destroy them if at all possible. And now that's the basic way that players will be trying to win. The light side will be trying to destroy 3 objectives, and the dark side will be trying to get their tracker up to 12. If either player tries to draw from either the objective deck or their command deck and can't, they lose. So that's another winning/losing condition in the game. And there you have it. That's just a very brief look at Star Wars the card game. Nothing fancy, but I hope it gives you a good overview of what you're in for should you go with this game. Again, the battles are a little bit more complex than what I made them out to be. Edge battles require some card reading and some stat comparisons. And combat itself, you actually have to pay attention to what units are defending, what units are capable of defending, what happens when there are no defending units, or what happens at the end of the combat whenever all of the defending units are destroyed. A number of things to take into consideration there. But overall, I do enjoy the game. It's a lot of fun. Vinny and I played a game, and it was a pretty close battle all the way to the end. You can check out my review at www.dadsgamingaddiction.com, or you can simply click on the link in the below description. That'll take you there as well. This is Vince. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.